Welcome everyone. Let's go into some introductions, get a flavor of where, everybody is, your experience and background for the context of the people listening in today. And thanks everyone for joining. Feel free to leave any questions, comments as you go through. I'm Sam, VP of Talent Solutions at hackajob. Host these fairly regularly, once every couple of weeks. If you've been watching, listening, engaging, thank you. And I will pass over to Meghan. Let's start off with you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Meghan Cantrell. I'm here in the States in Atlanta, Georgia. I've been in talent acquisition now for, over 10 years. Started out on the agency side, then started working internally for companies. I've worked for companies as large as 7,000 employees to small startups. Current company I worked for over 3.5 years as their senior talent acquisition manager. It's called Oxblue here in Atlanta. We are a tech company. I specifically specialize in building SaaS sales teams.
Awesome. Lovely to have you here. Let's go, Tom.
Hi, everybody. I'm Tom Chesterton, and I'm Chief Exec of Tonic. For about 30 years, I've been helping employers to tell their story to their people and to potential people. So looking forward to this conversation.
Bryan, over to you.
Yeah. I still can't believe Tom's been doing that for 30 years. But hi, everyone. I'm Bryan Adams. I'm the CEO and founder of HappyDance, enterprise solution careers website platform, AI enabled, of course. But my personal experience over the last 20 years is employer branding, candidate experience, and all things strategic in that line of work. So happy to be part of this. Sam, back to you.
Yeah,
back to you in the studio. So.
Yeah, back to the studio. Here we go, ladies and gentlemen. But you've got to keep saying the word happy all the time. That's like your buzzword, and it's definitely 5 o'clock somewhere. I love the red wine interlude. By the way, Bryan is not in the US. This is not first thing in the morning for pure context.
Thanks for clarifying that.
He is in the Mauritius, and it's super late, and he's prepping for a talk tomorrow. So great to have you with us. And I think the segue there, AI enabled, of course it is, right? We had the AI Super Bowl yesterday. For anybody that caught that with NVIDIA, as they called it, a 2.5 hour long keynote, some absolutely astounding changes that are coming in every week. What you were saying the week before is out of date, and it only seems right to kind of start with not just the topic of the moment, but despite the level of hype that there is, the hype is still not matching the reality in my view, and we need to constantly talk about this and constantly be educating each other and understanding. But I don't want to go all Clubhouse for recruitment. If you remember that during COVID, everybody thought that, let's all jump on that, and here's the buzzword, and there's a new social platform, and this is what it's going to mean. Like, I think we need to move away from the fads and focus on some of the things which are a bit more actionable. So I'd love to maybe start with something really broad, and maybe come to you first, Tom, on like, where do we see what's going to remain table stakes, what's going to remain the same, and then where do we see areas? Let's do it along the candidate funnel, that candidate journey, where automation is going to be more relevant, AI is going to be more relevant. Like, what do you see is the same? What do you see is going to change?
Actually, I think at this point it's the most interesting time to be in the world of, well, for me, brand, but for those of us in TA and the recruitment process, because so much is up in the air. I was asked a question by Bill Borman about 5 weeks ago about how would you approach building a brand for AI, which is kind of clearly playing to that that automation piece. And I don't have an answer for him still, and I think that the main reason I don't have an answer for him is that the things that are table stakes really are a good process that is seamless. It takes any level of friction out of the process from the candidate's point of view, and delivers good data to the organization that's running the recruitment process, wherever that fits within the funnel. I think the thing that's going to be the real differentiator, if I'm being brutal, is that the layer of humanity that needs to sit over the top of it. So this is particularly true in a market where the economy is not in a great place anywhere in the world, particularly even in growth areas. People are kind of taking a breath. So organizations are restructuring their redundancies. It can be very easy to become quite transactional, that people are just units of production, right? So the piece of differentiation for me is really about how do we influence people to make decisions, but in a really meaningful way that's personalized. And some of that has to be automated, but the more we can cut through that noise with something that's meaningful, the more people are likely to believe us. So the real points of differentiation are not the table stakes. I think that's what makes this particular space, when we think about AI, really interesting.
And there's obviously, the need for it, right, with the candidate side of the market driven from that automated perspective as well. They're matching, the volumes on the other sides. I love that. And somebody just put, let's put humanity back into the hiring process as if it's gone already. So maybe from, candidate perspective, feeling different. Bryan, let's come to you. What do you see is changing? What do you see is, going to remain the same?
Yeah, so I think the interesting thing about where we're at is it's very early days, and the simple answer is nobody knows. But we're still in the first iterative phase of using AI to create efficiencies with the same mindset. We're still very much in the let's make faster horses stage of maturity right at the start. And I think if we look back at this conversation in 5 years, we'll just laugh hysterically at some of the things that we thought and all the rest of it, because it's going to wildly go in a direction that nobody's anticipating. But I think the next wave of efficiency that comes from AI will actually expose inefficiency everywhere else in people's organizations. When we try and scale up and do things faster, we'll all see the brutal challenges that we need to face into, which is the basics of business strategy and process that we're not getting right, that we've got no business scaling up or trying to make run faster. I think after that, we've then got a period where we take AI and we start to apply domain expertise, and we start to take IP, and we then start to do a whole host of weird and wonderful things that just weren't possible years ago. So it's not. I always come back to this, and I've said this about a number of different sort of innovations over the years. It's never ever the tools. It's always how you use the tools. It's never the technology. So actually, I think we're seeing a period where AI is becoming a utility and a commodity like gas, electric, and water. And we're going to see a swing where creativity, innovation, collaboration, people, and culture as the true competitive advantage in business.
Yeah, and I think that's two people from a people brand perspective, and I think good to hold true to it. I think we're certainly seeing from comments from people that are watching straight away that around people that are job seekers, around people that are coaching job seekers, that they're feeling that that's potentially being removed somewhat. And I think there is potential that we're losing some of that element at scale when we are automating those processes and we are taking that part out. Meghan, let's come to you, just quickly round this one out.
Absolutely. So there's so much that we haven't learned yet with AI, but I would say the problem with AI is it lacks the critical thinking, the nuanced understanding of a human decision maker. So you have to be careful about how you use AI. I mean, it's great to support decision making, but it's certainly not a replacement. I like to think of it as a coworker. So let AI do the stuff you don't like doing so you can do more of the things that you do love doing and focus on that. And also what I am seeing as an emerging change is, AI in itself isn't going to take your job, but someone who knows how to use AI effectively is. So, for example, in sales or in recruiting, as part of the interview process, that's being asked now is, what AI skills are you knowledgeable about? So that's been really fascinating too, just to see the skill set being implemented of those who know how to use AI to their advantage.
I was going to say, I think those points are exactly on point. I think that look back, if you were fast forwarding 5 years and saying, what on earth is this conversation about? I think is right. Ultimately, what humans have a tendency to do is to kind of find the hybrid approach, where you look for, where we perhaps see AI for efficiency, but humanity for empathy. That's kind of where the natural endpoint to this is. So, it's not, is all automation good or is all automation bad? There is good automation, which is around scheduling and reminders and that sort of stuff. But if we're really going to personalize and show humanity in this, we need to be looking at where we really add value to the places that are really going to shape perception of organizations or to build engagements, whether that's discussions or feedback or whatever. I think that as a human interaction is obviously going to be more important. we've got to figure out where these two things come together to create that right blend.
And I think there was, the point of like, how can you make your adverts attractive to AI bots, to large language models, etc. I'm sure everyone's seen that clip of somebody booking a holiday and bots doing it on their behalf, and then the bot speaks to the bot. They realize they're both bots and communicate in syntax. Now, I don't think from an employer brand perspective we're going to be putting out brand messages in syntax, but I do think it, seeing lots of stuff around enabling personalization at scale, creating an experience that feels more empathetic, that feels a lot more connected to the individual, and like leveraging technology to do that. And we've been leveraging technology to do that for a while, but obviously it feels like it's accelerated a bit more. So like, yeah, for listeners, what are we doing from like an attraction point of view, from a, like, let's talk about scale here. We're talking about mass attraction and how we're leveraging tools or what people are seeing that's new. Yeah, leave it open to the floor. Anyone can jump in. Bryan, I'm coming to you then.
So what do you want? Something that's new from an AI perspective. I mean, there's so many tools out there now. I've been playing with connecting 11 labs with HeyGen, producing AI versions of video of me, recording enough audio so that AI can perfectly replicate my dulcet tones. And now by typing something, I can create perfect video that looks just like me, sounds just like me. And now you've got me at scale, which may be a good.
Which is why you're here at 11 p.m. today, contributing to this content, whilst getting ready for a 9 o'clock tomorrow. I mean, it's working really well, mate. It's bang on.
There you go. But I mean, if you think about that, how would you ever use that? Is it for onboarding with repetitive messaging that comes across better at video? Is it training and learning and that kind of stuff? And I think there's a time and place for that. But then you can take it to extremes, and there's the sort of meme use of AI where there's obvious examples of AI just being used for fad stuff that is obviously not going to stand the test of time. And I think this just needs to play out. It's just a maturity thing, isn't it? And again, in 5 years' time, we'll look back at some of the ridiculous things that we've tried to use AI for, and laugh. But yeah, using AI to replicate and automate those types of things from a video training and learning perspective can add a layer of depth, but only if there's an element of storytelling there, only if what you're asking it to do has that message that's on brand, has that empathy of who the audience is. And I think where that's going is being able to be dynamic and inject a layer of empathy that's currently missing. And I think, that's tagging onto what Meghan was saying and what Tom started with. I think that's something that we've all got to keep an eye on.
Yeah, nice. And Toby Coleshaw, welcome, who seems to think that personalized hyper sourcing could be done via video. And maybe, Bryan, your video recruiter is going to do their thing. I'm going to come to somebody who's actually doing that right now. Meghan, I think I've seen some awesome videos coming out from your side. It's a lovely segue through. But yeah, share.
Sure, I'd be happy to. So I've been utilizing videos to help in the interview process to streamline things. I've been doing frequently asked question videos, which I hyperlink into emails with our skills assessment, because we were seeing a lot of candidates who didn't want to do our skills assessment. And I saw a 40% increase in applicants completing the assessment after watching these videos. So these videos are not starring me, the recruiter, they're starring our hiring managers. And it's been so advantageous because the candidates can envision themselves in the role, company culture journey already taking place before the candidate steps in the door. They're helping the hiring managers to, give that candidate buy-in and help the candidate to invest really early on in the interview process and do something that may not necessarily want to do, like a skills assessment. And one thing that I think is a real, my favorite highlight of it is that they're accelerating the candidate interview process, because the candidates are coming into interviews having already known those frequently asked questions. So they can ask second level, questions in the process. They can really help to identify if this is the right company for them, and the company, the hiring team, can identify is this the right candidate, because they can just get that much deeper in the process. And my advice to anybody who might want to do these videos is to be authentic. It is not about production value. Some of our greatest success has come from outtakes that we've done where the hiring managers are talking about how just funny things. I have to go into a lot more detail about it. But it is your biggest commodity is the influence that you can provide, and videos capture candidates' attention and keep it. So don't be afraid to stand out, because there are countless companies out there vying for your candidates' attention.
And it was like velvet brush shoes or something. I saw one of the outtakes.
Yes.
And I was just like, that's brilliant. It's like, you want to work for a sales organization where we still keep it real and wear velvet brush shoes? I was like, that's real. And to someone's point on, like, you know, in the comments there around, you know, the types of content, the types of ways of engaging with people, I love the, like, keeping it real, keeping it focused. But then I also like the potential here. If you wanted to take this and play it across a global scale and do it in multiple languages, you could do that so much more seamlessly now than you could before. And by adding in that wave of maybe automation and layering that into the process on a global level, it then allows that second run of questions, exactly like you're saying. It's like we're creating this initial experience for people that we can add a much richer experience than just a job description or an email or like traditional forms of media, which then enables the candidates to feel more human, ask those questions, enables the recruiters to then go deeper on the other side. And Tom, you look pensive there, like you had something burning.
Pensive. There's a description I don't get all the time. I'm going to look that one up later. It's just this conversation, I think, is quite an important one, because we have to be mindful about what is the story we're going to tell as we go through this process. You know, it has to be cohesive and it has to work all the way through the process. It has to hang together. Well, I think that there is a danger with all these different vehicles that we can use, that this story becomes becomes discontinuous, right? So there is no narrative arc to it. But also, if I take a step back and I look at what is it that people who are talking about jobs tend to communicate, it tends to be quite a flat storyline. You know, everything is awesome all the time. You're working for an awesome company doing an awesome thing, and it's just a bit mono. I think at the same time, the trend within broader communications is to move away from purpose and from being worthy to being entertainers. You know, if you look at the way that comms is working and advertising is working, it's kind of almost going back to where it was in the 90s, where you had funny stuff that was on telly. And I think that kind of plays through to what our opportunity is when we're thinking about these different vehicles, is, you know, to think about the narrative arc and to think about the story, but also remember that we have this opportunity to entertain people and engage them. So irrespective of how we're communicating and what we're communicating, we're holding people's attention, because we are still in this attention economy, right, where we're fighting for people's eyeballs and we're fighting for their time. So unless we do that in a compelling way, irrespective, we're going to lose their attention very quickly.
Yeah, and I love that idea of the attention economy, and like this idea of, one, creating things which are hilarious, but two, like this kind of almost like cult following which brands try to like get themselves leveraged against. You know, that Aldi supermarket battle in the UK, KFC's new like cult of the chicken, which is like a pretty brave advertising setup in comparison to what would have happened over the years of like, hey, here's the product features, benefits, etc. You know, the kernel and anchoring on that story to moving to, yeah, like you say, this kind of humorous, entertaining setup. And so how do you balance being entertaining, maybe adding a bit of humor, adding a bit of human into the process, when I think we are becoming increasingly transactional? I think the human commodity phrase from earlier is right. You know, there are restructures in forces, there are redundancies. It's just feeling like that's the normal pattern. How can brands that have maybe been through that over the last couple of years think about how they position themselves, how they position their company when, you know, there's going to be a lot of questions over, hey, if I join, is this a long-term position? Am I building the data set that's going to empower your automated version of me in a few years' time? Like, how can companies balance that if they've been, I suppose, maybe less human, more transactional, to still tell that humorous story? Is it possible?
Yeah, well, I think there's two. You've got two options. One is to play the long game, and one is to play the very short game. The long game is, you know, where Nike or where Guinness sit. You know, they have a story that they tell, whether it's about being your best or about waiting for a great product to arrive. You know, so you play that and you stay within that message framework, you know, whatever the story is. The alternative, which is what we've been exploring with our clients, is how do you look at the trends that are happening across social? You respond to those trends for a week or for 2 weeks, but you're telling your story through the lens of, you know, a particular meme or whatever, as Bryan was saying earlier. that's happening in social, and you tell your story through that lens, and you know it's going to go away again. But again, that's coming back to understanding what human beings are interested in, and some of that is algorithmic, of course, but you've still got that core of humanity, and you can be funny, or you could be, you could have a tragic story you're telling, but you're telling a story nonetheless.
I think it's important to make sure that you automate the right things. And I think, if you try and automate what you know about an audience, then you're on very dicey territory. I think you can never lose touch and never forget the idea that, it's your job to know your audience intimately. And I think, you think about like the best comedians in the world, they'll tell jokes just like any other, but actually the ones that really resonate are the ones that absolutely nail the human truth better than anybody else, because they know their audience, they know the subject matter, and I think if you can always stay true to that North Star, you can be forgiven for automating and using AI and all the rest of it, but like you can never lose sight of that North Star. And I think Nike's a really good example, actually, because they play the long game and the short game. There's an authenticity to Nike. You know what they stand for, and you know what they'll always stand for, but they find a way to be relevant and current as well. But when it comes to AI, I think if you start to cut corners and you think that you're cleverer than your audience, that's where it starts to fail. So I think, there's an obligation to your audience to sort of be super upfront about what's automated and what's scaled and what isn't. If you overstep and you try and fool your audience and think you're cleverer than them, then, people are cleverer than you think, and they can sniff out, insincerity and something that isn't authentic, that is feigned, scaled sincerity or personalization to your detriment. So, I think if you can scale up from an efficiency perspective, but never lose sight of understanding who your audience is and what they care about, and segment in a smart and clever way using technology to create more space, to be more human, to demonstrate you understand and empathize more, then I think that's the best ways to use technology and to scale whilst reducing risk of taking it too far and losing your audience, actually. I think we will see examples of brands losing their audience because they've taken their eye off the ball from that perspective.
Yeah, I agree. And just building on that, I think it comes down to who do people trust? And the brands is it brands that people trust, or is it other people? So we could talk about how we use AI to influence people, or AI as influencers, which is new, it's novel. But to the point, it kind of it's easy to smell the inauthenticity in that. So what you really need to be doing is using your people. And often when we're working with clients, I'll ask a client how much they actually trust their people, to say the right thing, to have the capacity to say the right thing. What is it that they need to do to build that trust? And it's those simple human truths that are really important to capitalize on here. I think that's why what Meghan's doing with her video content is going to cut through that noise to really resonate with people, because it's people connecting with people through a format that people are interested in hearing more about.
But then I think just quickly on that point, though, like the scaled point, Bryan, that you were talking about there, and not losing sight of your customer and not losing that tone of voice, I still feel that scaled personalization is a better outcome than the same outreach going to every single candidate that says, hey, we think you might be a good fit for this role. Here's the job description, and away you go. Or incidentally, you're not a good fit for this role. Unfortunately, this position has now closed. It'd be much better to get something which maybe people can see through, that at least feels more valuable to them as part of that process. But if you've got the scope and you've got the strength to do it, that's there. But Meghan, I think you were going to come in there as well on that point on video.
Yes, and just a larger point as well. So what's interesting is that AI is thriving in B2C, but not in B2B, because trust, credibility, authenticity still really count. And it's fascinating to wonder where the candidate falls into that. Are they a customer? Are they a business? I mean, they're kind of both. But you can really risk a disconnect with your audience. And you have to keep in mind the human versus the humane. So I think what we're seeing is going to be a trend into kind of, full circle, going back to that humanity in terms of our EVP. And what you're going to see is wanting to talk about more than just talent, like the talent acquisition aspect, but like what I've seen, which is quite touching in recent years, is candidates wanting to know about companies' investment in community involvement. What is your investment in mental health? Or do you have do you guys participate in the community in terms of like 5Ks or something along those lines? But it's not just about what does this job mean for me, but what is this in terms of my day-to-day interaction, and how am I going to be a better person because of it? So, again, going back to that humane piece and keeping that in mind as you integrate AI intentionally and respectfully.
I love that, and I love the humane element. And I think again, the big draw from the candidate side, big draw for people. Like I've been at a lot of face-to-face events recently, and it really makes a difference to be back in front of people, engaging with a round table. And we were running some workshops, and yes, people were using large language models to support their outputs to share with the wider group when they're building models, etc. But actually the collective minds being able to interrogate and prompt things in the right way and build it together and make sure that that human element was not lost, critical. And I think that's the same expectation from the candidate side. But it's finding that balance, right, between very high numbers of candidate applications and creating a meaningful experience where you don't have the time to do it on an individual basis. And then from their engagement point of view, like how do you cut through that noise as recruiters become more enabled? Been a few questions, few thoughts in the comments. I'd love to go to the last one. It's a really long question, but we've said for years that engaging talent is the hardest part of the process. While the industry largely looking to automate and scale sourcing as the initial wave, candidates will be drawn into messaging or simply withdraw. Would internal recruitment business partnering not be a more obvious target, given hiring managers use offshore remote support for nearly every other corporate function? So lengthy, chunky question. Toby Coleshaw could be sitting in this seat asking that question today. Great question from him. Yeah, throw it out to the room. Sorry, it's long. It's okay, Toby.
Oh my goodness, there's a lot to that.
Right.
So if I was paraphrasing that question, how do you communicate with people individually when we're all used to broadcasting content?
Yeah, and engage with people, because is an area to start, not your hiring community, who might be engaging with people in a much more kind of one-to-one individual basis at the moment.
So I was thinking about 15 years ago, there was a process where all communications moved from being broadcast. I went through a process of what became known at that point as mass individualization. So it was bucketing content around behaviors or around interests. It's kind of lining up with the idea of personas within communication. So you would send out different content into different channels that were relevant to the individual. And as an individual, you'd receive it thinking it was for you, but it obviously wasn't. It was for a group of people who were like you. I think that's still where we are to some degree or another, because the end product of this requires commitment from organizations to say, okay, we are going to do this properly. And I think there's still that nervousness about using the tools at our disposal to properly personalize and to use data to algorithmically say this is what this person will want next. If you think about inbound marketing as a mechanism to make that happen, if you commit to that, it becomes a very personalized experience. But I don't see employers or recruiters committing to that fully. So you're going to retain that position of mass individualization where you're thinking about tribes or personas as a means of bucketing folk.
Yeah, and I think the challenge with that is even the most sophisticated recommendation engines, while Spotify throws you up some awesome stuff that you're like, wow, I've never heard of that before and I really like it. That's not the decision on a job, is it? That's that's the decision on, hey, what track's going to be next, and I can skip that quite quickly. And the same thing, you're kind of competing for attention there. But yeah, how can you build something that speaks to each individual in that way? One, I don't think we're there from a technology perspective, but could we arrive in a slightly more informed position when you're thinking about tribes, when you're thinking about groups of people? Probably a great amount of affirmation for your previous rundown as well there from Ian, for you, Meghan, as we run through on exactly how you read it, that like intrinsic versus extrinsic value. Bryan, I thought you might have come in there on that last point on Toby's world.
So what I found interesting about that question is, it goes back to the comments I made earlier about we're still in this phase of sort of faster horses rather than the invention of the new thing that's effective. In the name of efficiency, there is an awful lot of organizations now very efficiently automating outreach to candidates. But then when you add up the number of organizations efficiently outreaching to candidates, what it adds up to is noise to the candidate is receiving, such that we've ruined it for everybody and nobody's taking any notice of, I mean, I don't know about you, but my LinkedIn inbox is just decimated to the point where I just don't know what to do with it, / don't look at it anymore. Like, it's just ridiculous. So even the best storytelling, even the best outreach and all the rest of it now has just become noise. And I have a new level of filter now that I didn't have before AI. So I think the point is, rather than look at what can we do that we did effectively last year manually, how can we do that now with AI and scale it up? What's the new approach that is more effective than the thing we were doing? Like, how can AI enhance something that adds value to somebody's life in a completely different way? And I think until we crack that, all that's happening here is, remember, I don't know anyone else that follows Gary Vaynerchuk. He said this years ago. He said marketers ruin everything. When email marketing was first introduced, the open rates were sort of 50, 60, 70%. Now marketers have ruined it such that 1% open rate, we're doing backflips and high fives. And I think we're in that same place now with outreach and recruiters just ruining conventional approaches by scale, such that we need to change the game. So I don't necessarily know what the answer is, but what I do know, it's not just more. It's not more, and it's not adding scale. It's creating space to be more intentional and create more personalized, meaningful moments. And that is more than injecting personalized variables into the scaled email that you would have once sent to one person. Like, it's a different game.
I have so much I want to say. I kind of want to address it in like active versus passive candidates. So
Yeah.
Let's go with active first. So automation comes into handy because you get overwhelmed with candidates who aren't qualified, and an AI bot's going to help you to shrink that pile down. And so when this AI echo chamber kind of comes into effect, because how well do you know whether or not that bot is looking for the criteria? The coded language is specific for what you're looking for. So you have to hold audits regularly. You have to check that your AI is working effectively when it comes to those active candidates, and using it to ensure that you aren't losing candidates that are qualified, that those aren't slipping through the cracks. And that's absolutely a risk with that automation when it comes to the active. When it comes to the passive and the outsourcing, I have found my messaging is actually quite generic, because I recognize that there are candidates that may not fit box A but fit box B. So I want to make sure I'm having those conversations with anyone who could be a good fit for any of the roles I'm seeking out, and I don't want to shut them down and pigeonhole them. So when I'm automating messages, I'm making sure that, again, keeping that human aspect, like I'll highlight our Instagram page, or I'll highlight parts of what we do that makes us exceptional. I think what I've seen, and what you said, Brian, about LinkedIn messaging is ruined. Like those messages that just say, I'm very interested, they're just so canned. I'm very interested in you and your experience. Like, no, I want to tell you about me and my company and why we're different. We'll talk about you soon, but let me tell you why my message should stand out in your inbox. So that's just a little bit I wanted to share.
Yeah, 100%. And like, we met through a LinkedIn message, right? And it was by chance that it was through a series of LinkedIn messages that were largely irrelevant that I picked, that, and we spoke, and that was like, hey, we had that connection. I think your point, Brian, absolutely nails it in terms of the setup, right? I think that piece of where we were with email open rates to where we are now is the same challenge that we're going to be in. We have to think about a new way of engaging with talent. And to Toby's question of like, we're always thinking that engaging talent is the hardest thing. It's because marketeers ruin everything, recruiters ruin everything, salespeople ruin everything, right? Salespeople now are doing the same thing. They're using automated tools at scale that put in different pieces of personalization along their email copy, and it sends it out en masse. The numbers are just increasing, and it's like, how do we cut through the noise? Obviously, from like our bias perspective, from a hackajob like point of view, like we've got something there that at least matches objectively on both sides, which naturally kind of protects against that. So I think we'll see more vertical marketplace communities. We'll see more on the matching front when we think about like two sides meeting, that both sides, candidates and customers, have a bit of confidence that the meeting is going to be relevant. And that's probably going to extrapolate out into the broader world, right? It all comes back to trust. It all comes back to human connection. I think that's the one thing we can be sure will stay the same, even as like user generated content can even move into the world of AI and AI influencers that are pointing this stuff out, which feels like a good place to finish as we run over. I think lots of really brilliant input from you all. Your experience counts as we bring this together, and loads of awesome outtakes and lots of affirmation in the comments that what you're saying was spot on. An absolute pleasure having the three of you on in three corners of the world today. 3 continents. Look at this, 3 continents on this call. There we go. Thank you all, and see everyone soon.
Thank you, Sam.
Thanks, Megan.
Bye.
Thanks, Tom.